Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the platform of Studio B. And today I get to host a beautiful conversation with the one and only Durga Leela. A few things. This conversation is going to be recorded and is also being live streamed onto Facebook. So if you have questions, which we will have time for at the end of this conversation, and you don't want your face to be shown, you can always just type those into the chat. If you're not familiar with Studio B, we provide mindfulness training to companies, nonprofits, and individuals. And Studio B is a Pennsylvania proud women-owned company that's really committed to inclusion and diversity and the knowing that we're always in a state of learning. We really believe in the power of using technology for good. And at the heart of us as an organization is really service, radical compassion, and kindness. And so that's kind of the foundation for our conversation today. And our guest is Durga Leela. And Durga Leela is an Ayurvedic and yoga therapy specialist. She's the founder of Yoga of Recovery, which is a comprehensive program that integrates Ayurveda and yoga with recovery tools for those affected by addiction and self-destructive behaviors. She teaches a holistic approach to recovery, integrating mind, body, and spirit. And she overcame her own struggles with addiction and is a grateful member of the 12-Step Fellowship for over 21 years. As a mentor and teacher of mine, I'm super honored to have her here. And I'm going to begin the way that I actually began with Durga, which was the very first meeting, the first 10 minutes that we were together. She opened up what it was going to be 10 days of a training together with the following phrase. And she said that our understanding of our suffering defines the nature of our solution. I'm going to say that again. Our understanding of our suffering defines the nature of our solution. And so I think the way I would like for us to begin, Durga, is in a time when it feels like everybody's suffering from something these days, and yet we're so hyper-focused on the solution, like we want to get to the solution now. Why is it important for us to understand our suffering?
So good morning, good afternoon. Nice to see you, Jyothi. I'm so glad you remember that phrase. I use that phrase because every time I show up to teach, as we put in the word addiction, many people have a different idea about what that is. So some people believe addiction really only belongs to those who are addicted to alcohol and drugs. As we've gone into our modern society with more and more availability of what we call weapons of mass distraction, then people are beginning to understand, well, wait a minute, there seems to be addictions to other things, especially now modern day, the technology aspects, you know, the internet, the doom scrolling, the telephones, the internet, Netflix binging and things, probably pretty big during COVID. So there's that, like, what is the suffering? And then also, who is talking about the suffering in the idea of who's promoting the solution? So of course we live with the Western medical model, which is a disease-based model. And so therefore we call the addiction a disease. And then there's a whole investigation that needs to be made into what they consider then to fall under addiction. That's, you know, the DSM and other things, but also what they propose then is the solution. So in summary form, right now we're in a conversation with the Western medical model about the brain disease model of addiction. And so that is a valid aspect of part of the idea of addiction. And I was thinking about this today because I was just looking at some of these numbers on, you know, serotonin and dopamine levels in their brain. And it's like that objective biomarkers is the hope of the Western medical model of being able to ascertain what's wrong with us. But I find that they don't always match the narrative. So what's wrong with this is also how we tell our story and how we have been unable to digest some of the life experiences that we have had. Maybe we haven't sought them out, they've arrived with us. So, our karmas, as we would say. So therefore, when you're looking at the problem and the solution, especially from the holistic perspective, and with me, I'm looking at it from the idea of introducing the Vedic perspective, primarily concentrating on yoga and Ayurveda, but also bringing in aspects of Jyotish, the science of light, because we consider this as a problem of darkness. And that takes us into the deep psychology of the mind. So the mind being under the influence of tamas, one of the gunas, the guna of inertia, ignorance, darkness, lethargy, then the mind is like incapable of making better decisions at this point. So therefore, addiction is often when we are stuck knowing that we shouldn't be doing something, but continuing to do it anyway, even to the point of great self-destruction. So there's an aspect that you could bring the conversation around to reductionism, that, reducing the conversation of the problem into one organ in the body, the organ of the brain, like that for us in this holistic field would bring it really into the physical body, which is where the Western model operates from. But the holistic model includes that subtle body, which is the prana and the mind, and really the kind of deep understanding we have of the different levels of mind, the mind emotional level, the mind rational decision-making level, and then the spirit aspect, which is really just the seeds of karma, our samskaras. So there is a thought with us that a lot of the addictions have some karmic aspect to them. And I think society is waking up to that idea now that we're beginning to see the intergenerational nature of trauma. Like we're waking up to that. It's always been with us, but now we're waking up to it. And that waking up idea is it shows you a lot of the tamas we have been living in, with a mind that it's almost like we've been happy and content in a kind of low level material pleasures. And now we're kind of waking up for some kind of evolution beyond that. And that asks us into deeper questioning. So really that's what yoga of recovery is about. Of course, we deal with the physical too. Why not? Mm-hmm. Why not give some, care and love to the physical body just so we feel better?
I want to circle back to something that you threaded in twice in that opening response, which is that one of the things that I found has really stuck with me and I found really interesting when I came and did the 10-day immersive experience with you is when you sign up for even just a talk like this, that's you see the word Ayurveda, or when you sign up for a training that says Ayurveda, you have this assumption that you're going to walk in and immediately been given a dosha test and be told, okay, you're a pitta or you're a vata, given that label. And then someone's going to walk you through, okay, this is what you eat and this is what you don't eat, or this is what's good for you and what's not. And what I found really interesting and has stuck with me is that I think it was day 3, maybe even day 4, before you even introduced the doshas to us, because that wasn't the starting point. In fact, you started by outlining to us the gunas, and then we went into this deep dive conversation about the 3 gunas that lasted for 3 days. And that became the foundation. And so I'm wondering, I guess, first of all, for the listeners, if you could just explain what the gunas are, the 3 that you tend to work from primarily, and then explain why that is the foundational starting point for yoga recovery.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so again, well spotted that it takes me a while to get to the conversation of the Vata Pitta Kapha. And it is a little bit of a conditioning that as soon as we hear that word Ayurveda, we're waiting to hear that. And, because Ayurveda does deal with the physical body, and it's a sister science with yoga that really deals with the psychology. And then it's a sister science again with the Vedanta, which really deals with the idea of self-realization, the ultimate goal of life. So when we want to link those together, like we can go to what is Ayurveda tells us to treat the roots, not the symptoms. So not to just treat the superficial manifestation of the suffering or problem or health concern, but to go deeper into the roots. And the idea of our creation story is that we manifest from the subtle to the gross. So it's the mind that creates the body. So when we want to examine like the physical, psychological aspect, there's an explanation of that within the doshas. And I think we all love that because we're all kind of keen to see, who am I? You know, Cosmopolitan and all that have those questions of like, who am I? Answer these questions and we'll tell you a little bit about yourself, because we're complex, confusing beings, even when we're sort of healthy. Like we've got great potential and then there's a little scatteredness around that. So I think we question all our life, who am I? And also, who am I supposed to be? You know, so we're supposed to be healthy, and we follow all this physical advice of how to be healthy. And sometimes we're still not happy. Like we're supposed to be successful, and we follow all this advice of who I need to be successful in this world. And, you know, you see in our world that some of the people who are deemed the most successful are apparently the least happy. So this brings us into this idea of what's that gap? Like, where is that gap? Addiction tends to call that the hole in the soul. So it's better to start somewhere deeper into the causative factors, which is the gunas. The gunas are causal to all creation. So they are 3 words, which are really 3 words. If we wanted to, we could replace the whole DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, that's the Bible of the American Psychiatric Association, which it isn't really, because people who are psychiatrists work from their soul and heart and intellectual level too. But, you know, in the presented scheme of the social and medical model. So sattva is the idea of intelligence, the universal intelligence that is living us. So a clear state of mind that brings through the light of consciousness in a steady way. Rajas is the state of activity. So disturbance of equilibrium, and that activity can move in 2 directions. You know, it can move to greater evolution of the consciousness, or it can move into a dulling effect on knowledge or intelligence or even health of the body. So Rajas in its own right, as just like the guna itself is just activity, energy. And energy moves in 2 ways. I like to say either moves to heal us or it moves to harm us. So I talk about Rajas as the moment of choice. What do we choose? Because we're having all these felt sense experiences. So what do we choose to deal with the experiences we're having? And in truth, some of the experiences are pleasant. So do we get hyper excited about that and attach even deeper and want more and run after more and more sense pleasure? Or are some of the experiences less pleasant, and then we employ all our energies to avoid any more of those experiences? And in some sense, we're getting confused with permanence. So there's no permanence to any of these transitory, momentary experiences, but the mind kind of latches on to the idea, I constantly want pleasure and I absolutely always want to avoid pain. So we're running to pleasure, we're running away from pain, which really means when you look at it, we're always running, and that gets exhausting. So eventually that type of mindset is going to lead us into what we call a tamas. So tamas is the idea of ignorance. So we're going to say, firstly, what are we ignorant of? We're ignorant of that more subtle, deep, essential truth of our nature, which is the intelligence, the spirit, the consciousness. So tamas veils, also really relates to materiality. So we identify much more so with the actual material aspect of ourselves. So we begin to believe we are our body and mind, because we can't really separate the body and mind too much. Although we are aware that our mind has ideas, you know, we get an idea to do something good for ourselves, and yet it is our own mind that stops us doing it and has us doing something else. So the mind can be a bit of like a monster master. And so the doshas that you talked about, the Vata Pitta Kapha, the dosha in Sanskrit actually means that which imbalances. So the gunas of rajas and tamas are known as the doshas of the mind. So that's what imbalances the mind, to bring us to that state where we know what we are doing isn't good for us, but we can't stop doing it. And we know that there are things that are good for us and we like to be doing them. We're actually setting intentions to do them, but we can't really get there. There's some kind of blocks and obstacles to that. So that's why we start with the gunas, because to understand that, especially to understand that the sat exists always, you know, that aspect of consciousness is the one that is witnessing that struggle. You know, not doing the things we know are good for us and continue to do the things we know are bad for us. Mm-hmm. We are witness to that. So we want to draw back into that like calm, eternal state of intelligence that is living us and provide an access point to it. So it's really helpful if we can be aware that we are the resource that we seek. We are the wisdom, the goal that we seek. And so therefore, the best way to evolve in spiritual and psychological matters is to like give us that port in a storm, attach us to that higher ideal that we are, you know, eternally linked to the source of life. And so therefore we can bring that through as, you know, intelligence, resource, therapy, really, you know, to have that link. And really, it's just to a higher principle. So the three gunas are causal, they're fundamental. I work a lot from David Frawley's teachings. And his definition of addiction is that it's a form of mental disorder. And so that's slightly different from the brain disease model, because he's not saying it's a brain disease. It does affect the brain and the way it works on the chemical level, but he's referring more back to the actual subtle karmic level, and as well as the pranic and mental levels of the psychology. So he says it's a state of tamas, which is brought on by excess rajas. And the excess rajas is the extreme swings of the mind between those likes and dislikes, the raga dvesha, you know, attachment and aversion. And there's no peace for that mind because it's constantly going like a pendulum. So the idea of the gunas and the sattva is that all yogic healing and all Ayurvedic healing primarily focuses us on bringing more sattva to our life. So this is idea of action that's in line with the idea of yoga. So the idea of action that brings greater clarity and greater harmony to the mind-body system. And we really do need to be guided in that, especially because our society is pretty rajasic. And so the influence that we're getting from our externals, without us even really being fully aware of it, perhaps they're usually leading us to identify more and more strongly with externals rather than like a calm, secure, internal sense of self, you know, like just the news and things. If you're to tune into the news too often, you'll be a crazy person, you know. So how can you live in the world and yet remain calm? You know, in the world, you know, there's that old British saying that Svoboda uses a lot, keep calm and carry on. Like that's what we're looking for. So to introduce the idea of sattva is to introduce that idea of your nature as that calmness, and finding ways, immediate ways that you can connect with that and really remember it, like find daily remembrances of your true nature so that you can deal with the stress and the conflicts and the waves of the lived experience in this world
So interesting, because I feel like one of the things that my addiction stole from me when I was really in it was this sense of agency over being able to make that choice. I think you described it, I'm not going to say it perfectly, but of either moving towards healing or moving towards harm. And it's like that sense of agency of being able to engage in that choice felt like it was not there when I was really deep in the addiction. It was just, I landed in harm over and over again because my agency was lost. And for me, having this vocabulary of the gunas and creating that awareness of, for me, it sort of looks like this spectrum where sattva is over here and tamas is over here and rajas is this in between. Having the vocabulary and the awareness to be like, ooh, I'm in this middle activity space. This is the space where my agency lives, and I get to make a choice now of which direction I go, was huge. Mm-hmm. Because it felt like I got to reclaim that agency that felt like it was just lost for a really long time. So that was really pivotal for me. I think what I want to name now, and I ultimately I'd like to try and see if we can get to a conversation around compassion, because I remember that at one point you made the statement that the dosha lens introduces compassion. And so I'd like for us to eventually get there. But before we can get there, so we've said the gunas are sattva, rajas, and tamas. If you could kind of name what the doshas are and kind of give a 5-minute tutorial of kind of like what they are, how they connect to the elements, and kind of what those look like. And then how, by understanding the doshas, does that guide us to a space of compassion, both for the self and when we're interacting with others?
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to say I do love to hear you talk about what you learned on that yoga recovery, because that really makes my heart sing. And before I go to the doshas, let me say one thing, because I think this is, I'm currently just finalizing a book on yoga recovery, the Ayurveda for our addictions. And one of the ways that I've summarized those gunas is that we have all those gunas in our mind, you know, the sattva, rajas, and tamas. And so, as you say, you've got this, like, what direction are you going to go in? So the sattva, we say, is inward and upward. So we take responsibility for our own set of circumstances and actions, and the fact that action leads to reaction. So anything that we're experiencing has been brought in by our prior actions. You know, it's not random. It's an entirely just system of karma. So one of the things to understand about that is those different levels of mind need different therapies. So how I've summarized that, and it might help people to understand this, because most of us, and this is something that John Kelly of the Recovery Research Institute talked about when we realize we've got some kind of addictive struggle, we spend many years trying to solve it ourselves. Like, we spend many years like reading books and going to classes and just trying to get a handle on it. And a lot of the time we don't want to share that with other people. And there's a whole load of reasons for that. We might feel shame or guilt or embarrassment, or I think I didn't share it because I knew what the solution was and I couldn't even bear what the solution was. Like, you just don't do this thing again. Like, that was beyond my comprehension. So if there's more tamas with a person, you definitely need more strict supervision. Like, almost like you need to be forced to do the right thing. If we leave it to your decision, that drag of the heaviness and darkness of tamas will make you do the wrong thing over and over again. Mm-hmm. And so I think people don't always understand what is required. And this isn't always just to do with the timeline. I might be 7 years clean and sober, and I need some help with the tamas in an area of my life that might have to do with my behavior in relationships. Maybe I have some sexual acting out. Maybe I have some disordered eating. And so even although I've reached a level of sattva in one area of my life, I might need a different level of support in another area. So the rajasic is the swings between, love and hate, like and dislike. When there's more Rajas in our mind, we tend to need support. So I want to say, you guys putting together Studio B is amazing, that you're using the intelligent factor of technology to bring through spiritual teachings that people can access at any time. And the Rajas need support, meaning we're still not stable enough to do it on our own. So we have the idea of what's the right thing to do, but we kind of need to commit to the group, commit to the series of classes, commit to completing the course. And that much we can do. We can say, I'm going to sign up for this X many week course and I'm going to show up. And other people are going to be there. And that other people being there, that aspect of the we, is really helpful, because we often talk about tamas being the isolation. You're guilty on yourself, like all this self-negating behavior, so you don't want to be seen. Rajas is you kind of want to be seen, but a lot of us we're only seen when we're looking our best, and something about spiritual growth is we have to show up and maybe admit to not being our best, So it's that sharing, it's that support of like-minded people who are trying to do a similar thing to us. And then we get to the sattvic, which is when we have steadied ourselves enough, like we're sober enough, we're in spiritual practice enough to self-initiate. So we wake up in the morning, we go to our spiritual practice. It's not 6 hours a day, but it's 20 minutes of meditation, it's half an hour of asana practice and pranayama. And we don't need someone having us take the attendance sheet or someone waiting for us to show up for us to do that. And as I've been writing this book, especially as we live more in these times of COVID and isolation, I think that's 3 words that is really helpful for people to get a modern day real world experience of what those gunas are like. So being able to admit those points where we really need to be supervised and strictly required to be somewhere, or we just need that group support, that helps us a great deal. And then growing into that ability to self-initiate, is that there's a big difference. So supervision, support, or self-initiation. And I think we're all at different levels of that, even in a recovery pathway. Somebody should be supervising my Netflix stuff at the moment. I found Call the Midwife. And
I've seen every episode and I cannot wait for the next season, which comes out in October, by the way.
There we go. So I have to work at myself not turning that on till 9 o'clock at night, where I watch my 1 episode and then go to bed, and so it's not the highest yoga, but that's my little being able to rein that in and not just sit for 6 episodes and watch it, because it starts up again, doesn't it? The next episode starts in 11 minutes. So that's I have to self-initiate, turn that off and move on, go to bed. Not TV on, because I know myself, I love a good story. So I love watching the drama of all the characters and the settings, So that's an aspect of it. So I think we have to engage with ourselves compassionately, and then understand where we need to ask for help, when we need to ask for help, and that continuous different levels of help, the difference between being in a yoga class and having sessions with a yoga therapist. The difference between going to recovery meetings and then doing the deep work of the steps with a sponsor. Those are along the same lines, but more intense. So that's important. And then, of course, it all plays out on that embodied part of us, which is we are made of the 5 elements. So this material body, mind system that we are is a manifestation of the 5 elements. Why I love Ayurveda is so is everything outside myself. So as I sit doing my work these days, looking through my window onto a tree and the backyard and the birds, they are made of the same substance that I am made of. And so that really gives me that sense of unity at a material level. But then there's this aspect of evolution at the more subtle level of mind and soul, heart level. So the doshas, Vata, Pitta, and Kapha, just describe the biological forces within our embodied system, that Vata is the most subtle of the doshas. It's actually the boss of the doshas. It is primarily air element, along with ether, which is where we manifest from the idea of space and the intelligence and thought. So air and ether is Vata, governing movement. And then Pitta is fire contained in water. So it's to do with the metabolism of the body. And then there's Kapha, which is water contained in the form of earth, which is mostly to do with the structures of the body. So hence we have, like, we experience all those gunas, and we have all the 3 doshas within us. But what really helped me, and you mentioned this idea of compassion, was it really helped me because I somehow had got an idea that somehow I was defective in some way. You know, where was that from? I mean, it was from inwardly, that I wasn't meeting my own best intentions. So we start to kind of self-reject ourselves, even to the point of self-loathing and self-hate, because we aren't living up to our best intentions. But then we begin to notice, well, neither are other people around us. You know, they don't always practice what they preach. And so we start to begin to feel, in some sense, when you attack your own sense of identity, it's a shame type of feeling. You feel shamed of your own self. And then when you start to attack other people and what they do, it's like that sense of blame. And then when we look at our own actions and we don't meet up, we may intend to do better, but we don't, and we feel a great sense of guilt. Yeah. So how are we going to cure those problems? You know, because we're never going to have perfect behavior. So therefore, we have to find something that we can link our sense of identity with something more stable. My other problem, and I think a lot of people might understand this, is I was identified with the images the media showed me. You know, as a young female in the 20th and 21st century, this is who you should be. Well, one, I didn't really fully subscribe to who they showed me I was supposed to be. So the more I kind of worked hard to get to that, the more like inwardly starving I felt, because the material rewards left me more hungry. Like they left me with a feeling of, man, if this is it, is this it? Because it doesn't fulfill me at all. So like, I think a lot of people live in our world where we really do have a lot of material information, and we have a lot of material abundance. And yet we have that gap, that hole in the soul. We're still yearning, we're still longing for something. And the modern world then tells us to, you know, take what you've got and make it more exclusive, make it more luxurious, make it more designer. So we just keep thinking, well, I only have this type of couch or this type of car, so get me a better model, you know, let me spend more money. But it's the same thing, you know, like you can buy a bigger boat, you can get a bigger house, you can get a fancier car, and still you've got that kind of hole in the soul feeling, because the hunger, the craving is for more purpose and meaning. The craving is for more actual authentic connection and authentic self-acceptance, that I can believe in myself, I can like myself, even although I'm not perfect. You know, like a lot of people, you'll see them talk about their inner bitch or whatever, you know, like I can look at myself and think, wow, you know, I am not the most compliant yogi, not even the most compliant Ayurveda person. And yet I can look at that with a little bit more sense of humor, because I look at these fundamentals of my actual being, like the Vata, it's changeable, it's moody. The Pitta, it's kind of intense and driven. And then the Kapha can be like a little bit, let's just sit on the couch and think about it for a while. Let's mull things over. And I recognize all those parts of myself. So what I have to do is sometimes I have to ask for help when those parts get a little bit more stronger. They're expressing themselves in problematic ways. And other times I just set up a kind of fairly relaxed but repetitive schedule that if I do these things today, then like I feel I've done my part, I've done my duty for the care of the mind-body system. You know, for me, that means you're not staying up too late at night, getting up at a decent hour in the morning. For me, it still means having 3 meals a day and doing certain things at certain times helps me. And then also just having time set aside for spiritual study. So like right now, my study is on the Gita, and they're like, that's just, you know, such a gift of giving from learning the Gita. And then just also having time for just some fun, some joy. I think joy is one of the antidotes to the feeling of overwork or stress. And I'm so blessed to have Ayurvedic doctors. Now, at the start of my journey, I was diagnosed with clinical depression. And so just maybe 15 years later, I see a doctor, Dr. Suhas, who's in the Santa Cruz area, and he takes my pulse and he looks at my chart and he says, you're going into a period where it's going to be a bit of a squeeze on you. So my prescription for you is joy. You must do things that give you joy. So in all of this, it took me, I'm going to say probably took me a couple of years that I realized what he was diagnosing was depression. You know, in my actual metabolic system, there's that tendency towards depression. So I come from a long line of alcoholics and type 1 diabetics and things. So there's a metabolic reality to what I'm living. But his description of the diagnosis is you must participate in joy. And I just think that's just, I mean, I share that because it's just amazing, because the more you tell me I'm depressed, the more depressing it is. You know what I mean? I mean, it's always good to have a name for your suffering. But then again, we live with a disease-based medical model. And so therefore we live with pathological labels. It's almost our sense of belonging, really. You know, I belong because I have this label. You know, I can join this group, this support group, because I have this pathological label. So very, very key to understanding what yoga is as a therapy is first we must find something higher to identify with. So for the action that we're going to take and for who we think we are, we must attach that to a much higher ideal than just a disease label. Or even just an egotistical, separate individual label looking for happiness and contentment in the impermanent world.
Yeah, which really resonates too, because I feel like, you know, repetition is something that's come up a lot the last year and a half. For many of us, it feels like we've been in this permanent Groundhog's Day kind of cycle. And with, you know, depending on where you are in the world, you know, you're in this lockdown, or now you're in the 5th lockdown, or, you know, you're in this heightening or mutation of the, it's been this constant state of repetition. And yet for those of us that live recovery, addiction is repetition. We're very familiar with repetition. And yet living recovery is so much about finding that higher level repetition to kind of lay over that lower level. So yeah. I think repetition, though, in some ways is treated as a 4-letter word. Like it's something people want to run away from. They see it as negative, or there's this cringe that comes up. And yet for those of us that are practitioners, whether mindfulness or movement or whatever, I mean, our practices are repetition in action every day. They're just that higher level. Yeah.
Unless we fall into that kind of rajasic thing, where some of the modern yoga becomes this kind of performance, like, look at me, I can do this. But also, like, many people have found yoga and then they kind of go around on almost more playing field level of studying all little different parts of yoga. So in spiritual circles, it's usually known as what we need to do to get to the depths of that intelligence that is living us is build one 40-foot deep well. But many of us go around building 10 4-feet deep wells. And so it's really quite entertaining in its variety. And like we're fully engaged, but at the end, when we've expended energy, we still haven't mined for the gold that really is what the invitation is. So again, the Rajasic mindset tends to lead us in that direction. And like you say, addiction is repetition, but also recovery is repetition. But as we repeat something, like going back to that tamas thing, to even engage in some of the initial things is a massive effort. It's like, how are you even going to do it? But once you start to engage, there's a certain ease and flow. The Bhaktis would call it the flow of grace. The Vedantins would call it, that once you've hooked yourself to this higher ideal of your true nature as Atman, then there's that flow of like energy and vitality that allows you to do more and more, because you're not attached, you're not clinging on to anything. Your energy is freely channeling,
When I recall you, I think it was, I have notes somewhere, but you said something along the lines of like Sattvic people approach a challenge as an opportunity to practice a virtue, as opposed to like when you're in that Rajasic or Tamasic state, it's like, whereas that Sattvic person is like, oh, this is an opportunity for me to use these practices that I've been developing all along. And that to me is really like the difference, as opposed to like, I remember being in stages of my life where any sort of challenge, it was just like, oh, well, I guess I have to shut down and give up. And there's no way, it was this total tamasic shutdown response. Or I would become very militaristic and super efficient in trying to do a million things at once, as opposed to like, oh, this really is an opportunity for me to practice this virtue that I've been really working on like calm abidance or, something like that. Yeah, that was something that really stuck with me, that this idea of it being an opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let me say, firstly, I learned that from Swami Shivananda. He's written a book, How to Practice Virtues and Eradicate Vices. And again, there is something beautiful about having a person who has reached levels of sattva or spiritual enlightenment and has left us with the map of the territory. And we keep returning to that, repeating the study of the scriptures, repeating the study of the higher knowledge, and then eventually we're digesting that. And the pairs of opposites, like to learn Ayurveda or to study Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, that's what we're engaging in. Like to say that in this world, there is, I talked about sattva being inward and upwards, where rajas is more outward and tamas is more downward. So there's directions, but there's these two things. There's this and that, there's a spectrum between hot and cold and heavy and light, and those opposites. And we are that container of opposites. And so therefore there's happiness and there's sadness. So what do you do with that? Because if you constantly attach to this idea of happiness, you will feel the devastation of loss or unhappiness much more so. So it asks us to detach from that. So to detach, you need to attach to something else. So we attach to practices that help us remember that more steady, solid state, which is not extremely this way or that way, equanimity. And getting there is, it's a beautiful place. Staying there is a challenge, but there is the memory of that. So that's what we need to bring to remembrance. And really, I really do think that helping others is a great way to do that. And then also just keeping the company of people who have experience of like the equanimity of mind. That's really a great help too.
There's actually somewhat connected to that, a question in the chat where it just says, can you talk a bit about how your approach aids those of us who love or care for those that are struggling with addiction and are also working with our own recovery? In other words, there can be an addictive quality to caring, which can cause a great deal of suffering.
Yeah. So what a great question. that takes quite a bit of answering, really. There's so many different perspectives to that, but it is that idea of like association and offering care. So the idea, I think, is really that a lot of what I teach in yoga of recovery is the namaste aspect, that if we are really saying that what holds us steady is to see the light in ourselves, then I also see that light in you. And I also realize that the samskaric tendencies tends to make me project onto you my own issues, like the person is the mirror. So my opinions and my interpretation of the world around me tends to really come from who I am deep within. And so just watch your reactions. You know, I can be judgmental, I can be intolerant, I can be impatient, I can be worried about another person's behavior, but then I have to disengage from that because I have no control over who they are or what they do. I need to come back into myself and work with those aspects of my reaction. And like there's something that I learned in 12 steps early on, because I come from a family with addictive issues. And so you can imagine, I married a husband, his family have addiction issues. So like I'm surrounded by it all the time. And there was one thing that I saw in the 12-step recovery, which just said, be the best sister, daughter, mother, you know, spouse you can be. And then that's it, you know. Like you can't do any more than that. You have no power to change the other person's choices. And to be around that person, hopefully will be teaching you how to be more established in yourself and how to make better choices that support your access to inner contentment, because we know we can't rely on the people around us to make us eternally happy. We have learned this. I mean, the baseline codependency is, I think, the baseline of our suffering, but it's also pointing to that desire to kind of merge with something. And given that we can't merge with the other, like presented self outside of ourselves, then it helps us to understand the union that yoga is talking about, that merging with something that elevates us up. And it doesn't do it just for us. It brings the other with us, even although that might be a slower process. As you connect more closely to the essential truth of life, it does affect the lives of others around you. Just like as we move deeper into our addictions, that also affects us. You know, so it's where we hold our intention. Our intention transforms, but our attention energizes. So we have to put our attention on what we have the power to actually do on a daily basis. So we put our attention onto our own self-care practices and not, you know, drain our vitality into trying to control another person's choices. And then we also have boundaries. You know, we can say, that's enough. Like I can spend half an hour or an hour around this, and then I need to go and do things that fill the cup, you know, because we can't give from empty. So I often talk about it. We move from selfishness to self-fullness and then to selflessness, you know. But in that rajasic part, I think we're still struggling to feel that I need to fill that hole in the soul. And so we need those spiritual practices and the satsang, the good company, to help that happen. Otherwise, we're just deleted and depleted, you know.
Yeah. Well, I want to be respectful of everyone's time, and we're at about 10 till the hour. So if there are any burning questions that anyone wants to bring their voice in or add into the chat, I'd like to give a few moments for those now. And then following that, I'm hoping that Durga could lead us through sort of a closing meditation, which was one that was very impactful to me when I hadn't spent my time with her. So any burning questions that need to come in? I'll take one more breath, just holding space if anyone's deciding. Okay, Durga, would you like to guide us through an inner resource meditation to close our time together?
I would.
Lovely.
Thank you, Jyothi. It's been really nice to talk to you. So I guess I'll sign off here. And if I may just mention that this repetition of practice, I am going to offer new online yoga recovery sessions. We start on the 22nd of September. And you can see that on Instagram and Facebook, but currently right now on my website. So the website is yogaofrecovery.com, not yoga for recovery, but yoga of recovery. So as we meet in person or online, one of the first things that we do as we sit together is establish and continue to revisit our connection with this, what we call the inner resource, that idea of a felt sense of self that is calm and secure and at ease. So I give great gratitude to Richard Miller, who's the founder of I Rest Yoga Nidra. And I became aware of his work back in 2003. And I have great admiration because he's done that very difficult work of making it so repetitive and like, you know, able to repeat it over and over again, to do clinical trials, to get it introduced as evidence-based treatment for pain, addiction, and trauma in the Western medical model. So it's taught at VAs and different, you know, hospitals and clinic settings. So he's done a lot of that work that I would never have the patience to do. I also tend not to work in the clinical field. I tend to bring people to the spiritual homes of the gurus, the ashrams, which are places where, you know, we can investigate the holistic aspects without any straitjackets of the physical model alone. So I just want to mention the I Rest people and Richard Miller. And this comes from his I Rest. So if you're able to take a comfortable position, if you feel comfortable, close your eyes. And just arriving into your own sense of self, I welcome you to the practice of inner resource meditation, taking time to develop your inner resource, an inner sanctuary you may have visited before, or it could be a brand new place that you're discovering now for the first time. An inner sanctuary where you feel totally at ease and secure, able to completely be yourself without concern. This may be a special room, a meadow, a place at the beach, or some other location that when you're here, you feel completely protected and secure. Or it may simply be the feeling of being that underlies all that you are. This is your special place or inner resource where, when you're here, you can relax and feel completely at ease. Allow this imaginative place to arise spontaneously within you as a visual image. Accompanied by a felt sense in your body, a feeling of an inner sanctuary where you feel secure, protected, at ease, and safe. Allow all of your senses to come into play. Hearing sounds that are soothing and relaxing. Perceiving objects that evoke feelings of comfort and ease. Perceiving smells and tastes that evoke good feelings. Spending time now allowing this inner refuge of comfort, ease, and security to blossom completely into your awareness. Experiencing how being here acts on your entire body and mind. Allow spontaneous associations to arise with your inner sanctuary that evoke feelings of security and well-being. Associations with objects, animals, people, and any other resources that when you perceive them, you feel deeply at peace, relaxed, and comfortable. There may be people here who totally support you and value you for who you are, just as you are. Or there may be wisdom figures, a wise woman or man, or a power animal or object. Take a few moments now and allow these images to come fully into awareness, along with feelings of comfort, security, and ease of being. Know that you can return to your inner resource at a moment's notice. At any time of day or night, you can return whenever you experience the need to feel secure and at ease. Each day, take time to visit your inner sanctuary, allowing it to become a haven of comfort and ease, so that in your daily life, should you feel distressed by a particular experience, you can pause and visit your inner resource and remain here until you feel totally at ease, secure, and comfortable. Then, when you feel ready, you can return again to the experience and begin meeting, greeting, and welcoming it again into awareness. Knowing that you can return at any time to your inner sanctuary, should you desire to feel peaceful and relaxed. So taking a deep breath, maybe draw your chin to your chest, your right ear to your right shoulder, back to center, your left ear to your left shoulder. Just gently moving the neck. Taking a few deep breaths, and when you're ready, come back to your eyes open, awake, alert, and aware to carry on with your day. It's been a real pleasure meeting you. It's been really lovely to see you again, Jyothi. I look forward to the times when we sit in our circle again, but in the meantime, our Zoom circles are filling my heart too.
Absolutely.
So,
yes.
Thank
you for coming in and
thank you
giving us an hour of your time. And I'm sure we'll be in connection moving forward. Yes. I'll see you in another training soon. I'm certain of it.
Yeah. Thank you for the platform of Studio B. It's a beautiful resource. Yeah.
Lovely.
Good work. And thanks to Jane too.
I will pass it along, most certainly. Have a beautiful rest of your day, Durga. Thank you again.
Thank you, Paula.